What's up? Yeah, I'm talking about stuff. Hi. I'm here with Loki again. I hope that you guys are comfortable and ready to get into it because we're about to get into it. Get into what exactly? Well, that would be the poem in the Poetic Edda known as Skirnismal or For Skirnis, which is either the words or story of Skirnis or Skirnir's journey. This is actually the story of Freyr and Gerd, his perhaps destined bride to be, and his wooing of her. Kind of a love story, but also kind of a weird one, so I really wanted to examine this story in depth and really get into what might be some of the deeper meanings and themes contained therein. So yeah, let's get into it. So Skirnismal, or Freyr Skirnis, is all about Skirnir's journey on Freyr's behalf to woo this maiden Gerd to be Freyr's bride. And what happens is that Freyr actually sits on Odin's high seat, the Hlidskjalf. Oh, here's a Loki butt. So one day Freyr actually decides that he's going to go sit on Odin's high seat. And this is the seat, I always liken it to Cerebro from X-Men to make another nerd reference like I like to do, but it just basically enables Odin to see everything. Like, instead of just being able to use it to find mutants, it is a lot of sensory data just all coming in from all around the world, perhaps from all around the 9 worlds. And so it's a lot to take in, and I think if you're not prepared for that, it can definitely be a sensory overload, which might be what happens to Freyr here, because not only does he see this maiden, perhaps he's like up in Asgard looking down because he sees this maiden going to and from her father's house, and she's just the most beautiful thing he has ever laid eyes on. And from that moment on, he basically becomes deeply obsessed with her to the point that he's excluding all else. He's got a one-track mind. He basically becomes lovesick from longing for her. To me, it almost seems like perhaps something he has seen while perched upon this high shelf, and seeing this woman has convinced Freyr that he has to be with her, that marrying this woman and being with her is just the solution to all his problems. And maybe, since you get to process a lot of information not only about what's currently going on in the world, but maybe even like a web of weird thing where you're seeing all these possible threads and interconnections between things. It makes me think of the story of Rhaegar Targaryen in Game of Thrones. It makes me think of the story of Rhaegar Targaryen in Game of Thrones, where we eventually find out, spoilers for Game of Thrones, so I'll let you know where to skip if you don't want Game of Thrones spoilers in here, but eventually we find out that the whole reason he supposedly kidnapped Lyanna Stark is because he got it into his mind that there was some prophecy that had to be fulfilled, the prince that was promised, and so he has to beget an heir on this woman in order to basically save the world in his mind. And it almost made me think of that type of scenario where he is so obsessed that he has to marry Gerd that it's not only just, it makes me think that not only is it just an obsession on his part in his mind, but that something he saw while on Odin's high seat has just fixed this pinpoint in time in his mind of like, I have to marry this woman or something's going to happen, or I don't know. It's just very important to him that he gets to marry Gerd and win her as his bride. Like, past almost just like a love obsession to me. Something he saw while up on that high shelf and seeing Gerd made him think that not only is she the solution to all of his problems, but perhaps all of the problems, everyone's problems. His father Njord and stepmother Skadi, seeing his depressed and obsessed state, send his loyal companion Skirnir, which just means something like bright one, to kind of go to Freyr, his bestie, and see what's wrong, see what's plaguing him. Because he just kind of stays in his room all day. He doesn't come out, he doesn't talk to anybody, he doesn't eat, he doesn't sleep. He just spends all day languishing over this woman and just full of melancholy and pining for her. Skirnir goes to see what's wrong, and Freyr then pleads with Skirnir, his friend, to go to Jotunheim and act as his emissary and his kind of wingman and go speak to Gerd on his behalf and try to convince her to come marry her. So in exchange, Skirnir asks that Freyr sends him with his best horse and also his magic sword, which is either for Skirnir to help him get there and back or to offer the sword up as a bride price in order to win Gerd from her father, because her father is a powerful Jotun named Gymir of this powerful tribe of prosperous and perhaps even sorcerous frost giants. So it's also a long and perilous journey, and Freyr is also just kind of very disheartened over wanting to marry Gerd because she is a frost giant, and so he just knows or feels that none of the gods or elves are going to bless this marriage. But nevertheless, he equips Skirnir with his best sword and his most trusty steed and sends him all the way to Jotunheim to win this woman. This is also just kind of, I think, serves as not only a love story, but also a cautionary tale, because in his haste to woo this woman and win her love, he has now given up his sword, and it's said to be a sword that can fight by itself, so it's very powerful. In some versions of the tale, I've also seen it named as the Sword of Victory. So not only just a sword that can win by itself, but a sword that can just win, period. If he did have this Sword of Victory, perhaps when it comes to the time of Ragnarok, the final battle, if he had had that, he might have just had an advantage over his fated opponent, because at Ragnarok, Freyr is fated to fight the fire giant Surtur from Muspelheim, and now, as a result of him giving up this sword, he's not going to have a weapon. So it's then said that when he goes out to face Surtur during the Battle of Ragnarok, he is then armed only with a stag's antler, which is not only just very symbolic of Freyr and just his attributes as a deity overall, as like a stag god, a god of fertility, and a god tied to the earth and to the land and plants and animals, but yeah, it's just also kind of this whole self-fulfilling prophecy and fulfillment of fate thing that, like, now it just puts the gods at even more of a disadvantage when they get to that final battle because of the decisions that they've made previously, and just how the choices that we make and perhaps not being able to see all of the ramifications thereof can kind of lead to almost this look before you leap situation. The reason that I wanted to make the video about Svipdag and his journey to win Freyja first before I sat down to make this video is because my theory is that Skirnir is actually Svipdag, the mortal or semi-mortal. He doesn't fully belong to one bloodline or another. And not only does Svipdag mean something like swift day, tying him to light and perhaps a solar deity, but with Skirnir also meaning something like shining one, their names have very similar meanings. And my theory is also that since Svipdag had already made this journey, he'd already made this quest all the way to Jotunheim to win Freyja from the Frost Giants, and it had dealt with and triumphed over Frost Giants before, it would then make a lot of sense for Freyr to send him as his emissary back there again. And there is a passage where before Skirnir leaves, he does quote to Freyr, "The two of us were young together a long time ago," which in my mind is another hint that perhaps, not only do Skirnir and Freyr go back a long ways, but perhaps they go back to knowing each other through Skirnir being Svipdag and kind of being an in-law with being married to his sister Freya. But since Skirnir or Svipdag would then be going back to this place where he might now have some enemies or some people that aren't going to look very kindly on him, it's also a very perilous journey for him to have to make, which is also why he asks Freyr to equip him with the special sword and the horse and everything and all the stuff that he's going to need to get there and win her. Skirnir journeys all the way to Jotunheim, and then in an exchange very similar to the Battle of Wits or riddles that we saw in Svipdag or Fjolsvidsmal, Skirnir then also has a Battle of Wits at the gates of Jotunheim with another shepherd or gatekeeper there. Skirnir goes all the way to the gates of Jotunheim, all the way to where Gerd lives, and he says to the gatekeeper, "Tell me, herdsman sitting on that mound, how can I get past Gymir's hounds for a chance to talk with the maiden Gerd?" And the herdsman answers, "Do you have a death wish, or are you dead already? Because you have to either have a death wish or just either be very brave or very stupid to come here and think that you'll even get past, like me or these guard dogs, to get past the gates to talk to this chick." This also has a lot of parallels with the exchange that Svipdag has with Fjolsvid at the gates of either, Jotunheim, Asgard, depending on which theory you want to go with from that video that I did. But yeah, Fjolsvid also taunts him when he comes there and says that, "I'm just going to turn you away, you're never going to get past me, you're never going to get in here to even talk to this woman." But meanwhile, inside, Gerd has heard and felt the thunderous approach of Skirnir's steed, and she goes to her handmaiden and asks what's going on outside, like what's all this commotion out there? And she is told that someone is outside and his horse is grazing on the mound and that he's talking to the gatekeeper. Gerd bids that the stranger be welcomed with the customary hospitality and horn of mead, though she says, quote, "Though I fear that he may be the one who killed my brother." And this to me further implies that Skirnir is Svipdag, because there are also other stories where I'm going to make a third video delving into another, perhaps, account of this tale of Freya being one from the Frost Giants and now Gerd being one. Perhaps it wasn't as easy as may have been laid out, especially with all of the parts that are missing from Svipdag's Mall and Fjolsvidsmal. There are a lot of passages missing or things where it just skips ahead in the story and leaves things out. So perhaps if Svipdag or Skirnir did have to fight or battle his way back out of Jotunheim once he'd won Freya, or things weren't perhaps as easy as was laid out in that poem, that though I fear that he may be the one who killed my brother, it would then explain why Gerd would say that about Skirnis if he is Svipdag coming back and returning to the same place. He's been asked by his friend Freyr to once more undertake this perilous journey all the way to Jotunheim, as he once did to rescue Menglod or Freya from his former enemies and captors. This would also further explain why Freyr states that no Aesir or Alfar would bless their marriage, because these are their enemies and people that they've also dealt with as opponents before. And at one point during their exchange between Gerd and Skirnir, she even says to him that gladly will Gymir seek to fight thee if he finds you here. And I think not only is that just because he would not want anyone to be there trying to take away his daughter, and just because being a Frost Giant or a Jotun in general, his nature just might be one of violence and belligerence, but I think this also might just be hinting further at, not only would he be glad to fight any opponent that would just try to come in here and take her away, but he would especially be glad if he caught Skirnir or Svipdag there, because I'm sure he would then be even more eager for a rematch with him because of what happened last time. And it's also interesting that both Svipdag's Mall and Skirnismal describe Jotunheim as being surrounded by a ring of fire and guarded by fierce wolves or watchdogs, which is also part of why it's so hard to get in there. And just another reason for me to think that this is the same person going on a similar journey. because he's been there, done that. He might at least be a little bit more familiar with what it's like and how to get past these things and past these obstacles. And he's dealt with these people before. He's triumphed over them before. So it makes sense that Freyr would ask him to go back and do it again. Another thing which makes me tie the two together is that when Skirnir gets in, is welcomed in, and he's talking to Gerd, she asks him who he is and like where he's from and what his lineage is. Is he an Aesir or a Vanir? Who is he? Why is he there? And Skirnir answers, I am no elf, nor one of the Aesir, nor one of the Vanir. This would also, I think, fit with Svipdag as being a mortal or only semi-divine, because he would then not fit into any of these categories, but perhaps be of a mixed mortal and either Alfar or Dvergar bloodline, is what I think, because his mother was Groa, a Volva, and his father is Orendel, which might be an Alfar or a Dvergar. So yeah, it would then make sense that he can answer this truthfully and say that he does not fit into any of these categories. Skirnir then goes on to offer Gerd a lot of things to entice her to accept Freyr's betrothal. He offers her gold, jewels, and even 11 golden apples, which might be Idun's golden apples of immortality, which I could see it almost being this like ambrosia of the gods. We know that the golden apples keep the gods immortal and youthful, and that is very similar to the ambrosia that we see in Greek mythology, which grants basically godhood and immortality upon people. So if she's only a Jotun and not of the ranks of the gods or of the Aesir, this could be a very big deal for her to be offered the apples of immortality and offered the chance to not only marry Freyr, but become immortal and join the ranks of the Aesir and Vanir. So it's kind of a big deal. But she still refuses, saying that she has enough gold and jewels and that her father is very rich, so she doesn't need any of those things. So he keeps offering her all this stuff, she keeps refusing, and he then turns to threatening her. And they're not very light threats either. He gets very harsh and mean and threatens her with some not very nice things. He reveals that he also knows sorcery and magic. Like, first he threatens to just plain, like, kill her and cut her head off with the sword, and that's when she's like, oh yeah, I'd like to see you try. Like, my dad would definitely, like, wait till my father hears about that. He would kill you. And so then Skirnir goes on to reveal that he also knows sorcery and magic, which would also track with him coming from a line of sorceresses, or his mother being Groa. That might explain why he would know spells either from her or just from being besties with Freyr. Maybe they taught him some stuff. But he tells her that he has carved a magic wand, which he will use to curse her with all manner of fates worse than death. Only then does Gerd at last agree to meet with Freyr, but only in 9 nights, and she says that she will meet him in the sacred grove on Bari, which means something like Grain Isle or Golden Isle. So just an island of fertility, grain, all those things that Freyr would be tied to as a fertility god. And this is something that I wanted to examine and kind of go on what might be some of the deeper metaphorical meanings of this poem, because it's said in a lot of the passages about Freyr that he is just this really upstanding guy. He is just like the epitome of what it means to be like the solar masculine, of this lifting people up. And in Locus Senna, at one point, even Tyr says that he is just the most just of all of the gods and that he would never even make a woman cry. So that's why it really struck me as odd that Skirnir would threaten his bride with all of these terrible things and not very nice things. He threatens to kill her. He threatens to curse her to just be alone forever and that no one will ever want to be with her, or that either she will be consumed with longing so that she'll just basically be this lustful woman and go do all of these things and act wantonly. Depending on how you want to interpret the verbiage here in this passage, it's just not very gentlemanly. Let's put it that way, the things that he is threatening to do to her. And so it really struck me as odd that Freyr would sanction these things. But I think either this might just be tying it further back to the whole Skirnir is Svipdag theory of mine, because Skirnir has dealt with these frost giants before. He's had some not so good run-ins with them before. They're kind of maybe his sworn nemesis at this point. And so he might just be more willing to go there himself, regardless of what Freyr wants, to be harsh with them in his dealings because of his past. Or what I wanted to delve into here is this deeper, ancient concept, which you'll see in mystery cults and things like that. My source here that I really went back to brush up on this whole concept was Fraser's Golden Bough. It talks all about the dying and resurrected god mythos and examines it within different cultures. And I definitely see Freyr as another possible embodiment of this dying and resurrected grain god mythos that you will see. Things like Tammuz, Dionysus. I can do a whole other series of videos just on that. But along with this whole earth god, grain goddess, dying and resurrected thing with the cycle of the year that they're following, and Freyr being a fertility god, this story might also be a metaphor for what is called the sacred marriage, or hieros gamos. And I thought it was also the same thing as the alchemical marriage, but then when I was looking at the secret teachings of all ages, that's kind of a whole separate thing. But yes, the sacred marriage is this ancient mythological concept, and you'll see it, I think, tied in a lot of druidic rituals and things like that, and somewhat in modern day Wiccan or witchcraft rituals, where you'll have just a god and a goddess coming together to form this whole, and just this sacred union between the sacred masculine and sacred feminine coming together. So I think that this myth is a metaphor for the sacred marriage, with Freyr as a fertility god, bringing fertility to the land and the crops, and representing that ingwas, that seed of potential and growth. And then Gerd meaning something like enclosure, which is also kind of what Midgard is. She's a Jotun, and so just perhaps tied to more of the earth as a fertility goddess in that aspect. And so this might be perhaps why Gerd scorns his gifts and offerings at first, as not only an earth, fertility, and grain goddess herself, and the daughter of a rich and powerful Jotun, she not only has no need of him, which also reminded me a lot of the tale of Inanna and Dumuzi, where it's called Inanna Prefers the Shepherd, where she's kind of needing to choose, is she going to marry a shepherd god or a farm god or grain god? And so maybe she's kind of scorning Freyr as like, you're just like a farmer. You're just a farmer. Why would I want to marry you? Like, you just play in the dirt. Like, what do you have to bring to the table? It also reminded me of the story of Odin trying to woo Rind or Rindr as a Jotun because he needs to beget a son on her to avenge Balder. And she is kind of this frost giant and portrayed as being very cold or icy at first as a result. And so Gerd, as the daughter of a frost giant, might also symbolize the frozen earth, which has not yet been thawed in early spring, and now Freyr is sending his emissary Svipdag or Skirnir as the shining one, or the beams of the sun down to earth as kind of his precursor to announce his arrival as the fertility god with the coming of spring, and trying to get her to kind of thaw out a little bit and stop being this ice queen, and thaw to him a little bit and be willing to accept him and accept his seed, if you will. And so she might be this frost giant, this frost goddess who's the frozen earth of winter, saying, no, I don't need no man. I'm not going to let you in. Symbolic wooing of her and thawing of her by the sun as the earth starts to warm in spring. We know that Svipdag, when he was trying to convince the gatekeeper to let him in, tried to pass himself off as Vind called, Var called, the cold of early spring. So I think there are definitely a lot of deeper metaphors that you could read into this tale, with Freyr wanting to woo this earth goddess and come together as the land and the fertility god in order to make the crops grow throughout the year and bless the land with fertility. When they come together, it definitely harkens to this deeper archetype of him as the dying and resurrected grain god, the Fisher King mythos that I kind of touched on in my Wheel of Time video, with Rand being the Fisher King, the deity or god whose vitality, whose life is tied to the vitality and fertility of the land and the crops and the harvest itself. So you want to have this sacred marriage between him and the earth goddess in order to ensure the most vitality and the most fertile harvest possible, which is why it's also very important for him that they're able to come together and have this sacred union, because otherwise they won't be able to bless the earth itself and make the crops grow and give those gifts of fertility to earth and to everyone there. So that might be why it's of such utmost importance to him that he's able to come together with Gerd and marry her, because it represents this deeper sacred marriage and this sacred union between the sacred masculine and feminine coming together to nourish the earth itself. And it's interesting also that Skirnir offers her these golden apples, which Nanna, as Baldur's wife, is the keeper of, because eventually Nanna goes to live in Helheim with Baldur after his death. And as I said, it also reminds me of the story of Inanna, the Mesopotamian goddess who marries Dumuzi, the shepherd-farmer god, but her sister is Ereshkigal, the underworld goddess of death. And eventually, through just happenings or fate or what have you, Dumuzi, like Baldur, is killed and forced to spend half of the year in the underworld, and then half of the year he's allowed to return above ground and be with her. And Skirnir even offers Gerd Draupnir, the magic arm ring that Odin placed on Baldur's pyre, which is then sent back to Odin with Hermod, though Baldur must stay in Hel. So it just might speak to this deeper allegory of a god of agriculture sending the Shining One, sunlight, to prepare Gerd as the earth for his arrival and the sowing and planting of seeds for the year. It might also serve, as I said, as a cautionary tale where Freyr gains too much knowledge from trying to sit on the high seat and then kind of becomes obsessed as a result of, just taking baby steps, looking before you leap, not getting caught up in this whole fate thing that like Odin often does, because then he gives up his best weapon, the Sword of Victory, which is also another tie to Skirnir being Svipdag, because Svipdag wins the Sword of Victory in his quest to win Freyr. So that might be where he got it from as a result, and then gave it to Freyr to be able to stay with Freya. I think it just speaks to this deeper allegory of the sacred marriage, where Gerd and Freyr, she who fertilizes nature as an earth goddess, must herself be fertile. And so it speaks to just that time of year when offerings would be made to the Frigg and to these goddesses of love and marriage as a way to also strengthen the bond between the goddess and her sacred consort, and also therefore promote the fruitfulness of their union between the earth god and the fertility god and the earth goddess, and therefore bring fruitfulness and fertility to the earth, cattle, and mankind. So that could be why it's so important. The Golden Bough goes really in depth into this sacred union between the divine masculine and feminine, and the union of the goddess Artemis and her consort Hippolytus, or in this case it's reversed, with the divine wedding of Freyr as the fertility god with an earth goddess, or perhaps virginal goddess Gerd, because her name means something like enclosure or hidden one. So perhaps she was just this like divine virgin or giantess not wholly of divine origin. They just personify the powers of vegetation and the earth as male and female, and their union, their coming together, also quickens the growth of the trees and the plants by representing the marriage of these deities. as they come together and quicken, they also bring life back to the earth itself and allow regrowth and renewal of spring. So yeah, I think in my mind that could also explain not only why it's so important to Freyr that he win the hand of this woman, but also why Skirnir might be willing to go to such harsh lengths and be so mean to her to like almost force her into this marriage, because if she doesn't, the crops aren't going to grow, the land's not going to be fertile, and it's just going to be really bad for everything, for the natural order of all of nature and the cosmos, basically. And then why does she say they have to wait 9 nights before they unite? In the Golden Bough, he kind of touches on that perhaps this was either a belief that by consummating the sacred marriage, it will give fruitfulness to the land, animals, and crops, and so therefore would waiting and deliberately storing up said energy yield greater vitality and fertility when at last they do come together. Because like Freyr's kind of moaning and groaning over the fact that he has to wait so long. He's like, oh, like 3 nights would be bad enough. How am I supposed to wait 9 nights before I get to be with this girl and score? And maybe that's why, like maybe she's like, if you save up all of that vitality and that energy when they do come together, it's going to be an even greater unleashing. They'll have even more energy to bring to the table and to bestow upon the earth and the crops and everything as a result. Those are just some of my theories. I just kind of wanted to go over this story, this quest of Skirnir to woo Gerd, and go over the love story, if you want to call it that, of Freyr and Gerd. It's just kind of a story of Skirnir going to either convince, cajole, or coerce this giantess to marry Freyr. Once she agrees to do it, that's all we really hear about her. We don't get to hear any of their actual marriage ceremony, what happens afterwards. Do they live happily ever after? We don't really know. I hope that you enjoyed this little deep dive into the tale and what I think it might represent as some of the deeper layers of meaning behind it, and why you'll see things being laid out in this way. Why send Skirnir? Who is Skirnir? I think it's Svipdag. Let me know what you think of my UPGs or theories on this. Yeah, let me know what you think about the tale being a deeper metaphor for the sacred union between fertility god and earth goddess. This video is getting long and rambling enough. I think I covered all of the points that I wanted to make and all of my arguments for why I think it is this deeper metaphor and why I think Skirnir is Svipdag. Let me know what you think about this. And until next time, stay classy, pagans.